All right.
Welcome to this learning call about the Swiss Future Council and
Yes.
featuring Che Wagner and Katie Reed.
Thank you. So since we are in the cozy mode, I think we all like that actually, because we were I was in a lot of crowded spaces today, so this is refreshing. So I will try to keep it not super long, and then we have maybe some in-depth kind of questions where we can get into and maybe even go into your project or like the things you are interested in within this realm of young people's participation in deliberative democracy. So I'll share some slides and go over them. Voila. Is that working out? Yes? All right. So yeah, our key question is, what can we learn from this first iteration of this Future Council under 24? And we have done a extensive brochure or a study, if you like, on all of that, on the things we will discuss today. We will not have the chance to really like dive into the data and kind of what the particulars are. So we have a more kind of overview over what we think we can learn from this first Swiss Youth Assembly. As I said before, this case was done in 23, 24. We are somehow still working on it kind of as a follow-up with kind of the official process of the assembly, the 3 weekends with the young people, and kind of the recommendations, the formulation of the output of the whole assembly is already done and kind of handed over to government officials and politics more in general. So to break it down in some further questions, or what I would like you to understand today is, what is kind of the motivation? Why do we do a citizens council for teenagers and young adults? What did the Future Council kind of want to achieve in that? What are the concrete results? And then the most important for today, I think, is the kind of the learning and the conclusions. What do we take out of that process, and how do we really want to continue to work? And yeah, that's kind of the overview of today, of this call. So in part one, it's more like the project itself, how it was set up, the process, everything like that. And then the part two will be more about the learning and how we want to continue. So to start out, there is some numbers we can run through. There is a lot of numbers. There's a lot of reasons to a citizen assembly in general, but especially to involve children and young people in these deliberative formats. In the Swiss case, there's a quite low, also in comparison, quite low participation rate with young people aged 18 to 25. Of course, under 18, they're not even allowed to participate in voting, so that's 0. But also overall, these numbers were declining over the last couple of decades. So that's kind of one reason to go this route. Then we also know from a particular research that young people are particularly interested in new formats, in new democratic formats like citizen assemblies. So that's a second motivation, like to try and experiment with these kind of formats, especially with young people. And in our case, this was an interesting joint venture kind of between the Swiss UNESCO Commission and my organization, the Swiss Society for Common Good, to kind of join up and experiment with this new format. The UNESCO Commission is a very interesting organization. It's an international UN organization, but every country has kind of their commission. And normally they also have funds for these kind of formats. So that's maybe something to look into. Also in other contexts, might be interesting. So what what was kind of the project, what is the aim of the project, where do you want to go, what do we want to test out, basically. There is many things to mention here, but the three main kind of pillars of the whole project were to test out kind of a comprehensive governance structure for a citizen assembly with young people. We could, or our research also showed us that there's always a governance structure, of course, but not as maybe extensive or comprehensive as this one, with lots of layers and kind of, a governance body. Then the second was to test the lottery system, or like the sortition. Would young people be like interested even in that kind of process? Would they commit to it? Would they really show up? And what kind of, does that work basically for 80 young people between 16 and 24? And the third pillar was also very important, that we didn't have a topic from the beginning. So we weren't like, this project was not set out to be about a certain topic like climate or other topics, but it was open, which was also a chance for us to test kind of a topic selection. So these were three important. Here we cannot dive like deep into that, but as you can see, we decided to, for the topic selection, we decided to do a representative survey amongst young people between 16 and 24. And really kind of let them choose what they want to talk about, or like what the topic should be of the assembly. And we had a really clear winner, which was mental health. And that was very important also for kind of young people to feel the agency and or kind of the urgency of the topic. I think that played a large role in the success of the project overall, I would say. So that was for sure a positive experience overall. On the right, you can see like a small scheme of the governance body. We did really like an extensive process where we designed a rule book, also together with young people, to kind of make sure assembly members know where to go with what problem and what is kind of the oversight of the whole process. So that really made a difference in how much young people would identify with the whole assembly and kind of the whole project. So yeah, there's lots to talk about here, but overall, I would also say that was a very interesting experience to also put a lot of energy into a governance system kind of within the assembly. So some concrete results. We basically going to fly over it, but I think you get kind of some sense what the results were. So first of all, I think it was a big success in terms of participation of kind of civil society organizations and also government bodies. So the whole mental health sector and also sector of kind of young people's organizations, they were really open to participate in the assembly, in the learning phase, to get inputs into the assembly. So there were a lot of involved stakeholders. And I think this topic selection process really helped with that, because they could kind of see that this topic was not chosen that kind of top down or by the government, but it was really from like bottom up with this survey. So I think that was a positive experience after all, I would say. And also these organizations were not just involved like just in one process or one step, but overall also the results, as you will see after, the results were or the recommendations out of this assembly process were really heard within this stakeholder community we created. So it's kind of a two-way thing. It's I think it's a lot of work behind it, of course. Our team really worked tirelessly to kind of involve all these stakeholders, but in the end, I think the benefit was really there, I would say. Then as a second, as I said before, like the testing of the lottery, I think that was a big success too. There was a lot of interest. So we had kind of a very good ratio in terms of invitations, how many people of the people that got the invitation to participate in the assembly that would really be positive about it and really sign up for it. So we had like I think 1,600, 700 young people out of 20,000 that would say yes. I could imagine being part of that process, which was for us really we felt really lucky about that. And in the end, we created two groups. One group was the assembly members, the 80 members of the Citizen Assembly. And the other group was a control group that was that we asked also that we also could ask questions before and after, but that wouldn't be directly involved in the Citizen Assembly. And the cool thing was that over 92% would say we really trust this process, like the sortition. We understand how it works, and we really think this assembly would represent us. So I think that was a really important kind of measure for us. If this whole thing, or like this whole approach of sortitioning would kind of have this positive echo in with young people, and I think we can say that we succeeded that. In the end, we had these 18 recommendations about mental health on a national scale. Out of 33 that were drafted. So we had a supermajority of 75% that was needed in order to really get the recommendation through the finish line. That was a high mark, but I think it's like in other assemblies, sometimes you have 150 or 200 recommendations. We really want to boil it down and kind of have the most important ones, so that they can really play a role or stick out in the coming process. Yeah, we're not going to go very deep into that, but as you can see here, it's kind of the question about sortition. Do you trust the process and the sortition process? And you can see the participants and the ones that were interested in participating, and there's the ones that were participating had an even higher trust, of course, because they were part of the process, but also the ones that were interested really trust in the overall in the process. And there we ask, of course, other questions about, do you felt respected? Did you feel like you can really express your opinion and freely? So I think in terms of process and facilitation, we were able to deliver, I would say. Yeah, there's some other findings about media and kind of how the dynamics went, how important it was also on a media discussion. And I think I want to explain a little bit about that. So as it was not a process that was kind of officially mandated by the prime minister or the government, we really had to find kind of the follow-up process. So as soon as you have these recommendations, the question is, who is taking them and kind of trying to advocate for them, basically, so that they will be implemented. And in our case, there is 5 major organizations, amongst UNICEF is one of them, that would commit to take these recommendations on and really trying to implement them or lobby for them, basically, wherever it is, in government, in parliament, or in other parts of society. So I think that was maybe a special, kind of a special case for that. There's other examples, I think, around the world, but in our case, that was kind of the major impact outcome. As you can, like, so after the process, this is kind of the number one thing that we follow up after the assembly. So that was a quick run through. We really had the time, and we are lucky to have time to really think about what do we learn from that, and how do we continue. As I said before, I think the process itself and kind of the overall experience felt very successful, and I think also the project itself got a lot of acclaim in kind of the ecosystem. But we knew that we're not going to just rinse and repeat, kind of, or just do the same process again. So we really took some time and tried to zoom out and really think about, okay, if we do it again, what is kind of what are the major learnings about this whole project? And there's some key learnings here and some conclusions I will end with. And I think I touched upon some of them. But I think the number one learning is citizen assembly work with young people. I think that's that's an important learning. And they're particularly well suited for involving underrepresented groups in democracy. So, and I think we can really show that with what we have with data and also the learnings we have. So it is a very interesting instrument in terms of involving young people or even children. In our case, we didn't have children that are normally not kind of close to these kind of discussions or like political debate or even just learning about democracy. So I think that's a very, that's a very important finding. And the second thing is that this approach is quite new in kind of the youth organization or like young people's organization field. So you have to pay attention not to be too fast and really involve early on these kind of stakeholders who are already in the field trying to do really good work. I think in our case, maybe we jumped a little fast or we just wanted to do the assembly. So I think that's a major learning too, to really know your field and involve early on. I think that's a number two learning. And then as I indicated, kind of there was no like official channel between the assembly and the output of the assembly and kind of the larger field of democracy or other institutions in democracy. So I think that's a major learning too, that we have to figure out kind of the interface between these deliberative formats and kind of other governing bodies. And so we can make sure recommendations go to the right place in the right time, kind of after the process is finished. So I think there we can really learn a lot more, I would say. And then, there's some other learnings, basically concerning like it would be nice to have similar quality standards or like standards at all between different assemblies, so we can really see what works and what not. And because if they're totally different from the design or kind of the outset, it's really hard to compare assemblies. So I think that's another learning, trying to kind of make them, even to learn more from more assemblies. And then maybe maybe the biggest learning from our side, and that's where also I think we started our conversations, Katie, is kind of we need structures that make sure that these assemblies are comparable, like I said before, but also are kind of integrated in the larger scheme of democratic institutions. Yeah, so that's kind of the overall, and that's basically also our conclusion, basically. So so as I said before, I think we decided to continue this work of really researching and trying to do more of these assemblies. But before we do that, we have to make sure that these assemblies are more integrated into the larger domain, kind of. So I'm really happy with that decision from our organization, because we have room and resources to really dive more deep into it. But we don't have yet another assembly coming up. So it's really about thinking through what are the kind of what do we have to reach in order to do another assembly? I think that's the point where we are right now. So I think one thought I also want to mention here is that we have seen in other contexts, for example, in Ireland, where Katie was heavily involved, that one solution to that problem would be to link young people's assemblies to larger assemblies with adults, so that there is an intergenerational aspect to these assemblies. I think that's one really important thought, and I think in a next iteration we would like to build something like that. So that's one of our conclusions. And a second conclusion is really, but we can really build on the experience we have because it has a very high kind of rate of positive feedback, and young people are really engaged, and they are continuing to be engaged. So the assembly members we had, there's like part of them, I would say a third to half, are still like really engaging in their recommendations, and they really want to follow up the process. So I think that's a very good sign that kind of the identification with the process is really high, and that's really wonderful to see. Yeah, after all, we are looking into now, okay, we already have direct democracy in the Swiss case. So our question is really, what is kind of the benefit of these deliberative formats, and how, if so, how can we integrate these deliberative formats within the framework we already have? I think that's our key question right now, and that's where we're working on right now. So maybe that's helpful to give you an overview what we are working right now with these conclusions, and what kind of the next month and years will show. So here you can see like the process overall of a citizen assembly. So you have to initiate the process, you have to do the sortition, the learning phase, which is kind of the input phase of the assembly, then deliberate, recommend, so the recommendations, the actual output of a citizen assembly, and then the evaluation and implementation of these recommendations. I think for each of these steps, there is different learnings, but what we are looking right now, I think, is initiating, evaluation, and implementing, because I think the other steps, there's a lot of learnings, there's a lot of ways to do it, and it's very interesting to look at that, and how do you do the learning phase? How do you do deliberation? I think there's a lot of room to discuss and to see what the best methods are, especially with children and young people. But what we are doing right now is really taking a step back and thinking about who does call for a citizen assembly. That's very, very relevant. And who is kind of taking the output of the assembly in the end. So these kind of the extreme sides of the whole process. I think that's where we are right now. So to visualize that, it's kind of the initiating of the process and the implementing or evaluation and implementing of the process. To close, I just want to mention that we work on 2 different projects right now. One is we want to build an alliance to embed citizen assemblies within an experimental framework. So to kind of close that gap. So to really see, okay, who is initiating the process and who is kind of taking the output of the process and puts it into motion. I think that's the first kind of project we're working on right now after the Future Council on the 24th. And the second, and that's where I work closely with Katie and thinking about with Katie, is how can we involve people that were already within the process, so alumni of citizen assemblies, and what role should they play in kind of co-designing the whole process? How can we give them agency in something that colleagues of them will be involved in the future? So I think that's kind of a gap we identified because there's not much there. And really the question, how can we use and involve and invite people that have like life experience of these processes into designing the future assemblies. So these are kind of the two follow-up concrete projects we are working on. All right. Now I talked a lot, but I would really like to maybe as a first step, just to give room for questions. And was that kind of, would you follow that? But I give over to you, Katie.
Well, firstly, Jay, thank you so much. It's always so interesting to hear about the process and to see, with having the little time that's passed, your reflections on the outcomes and impacts, and that's such, it's so exciting to see what the kind of legacy work has been for the Assembly, and it's such a yeah, a great opportunity for us to get to answer that big question, or explore that big question of how can deliberative democracy be more representative and inclusive of children and young people. And it's nice that we can kind of tag team on this issue, given that I'm working often with younger children, you're working with like older children slash young people into adulthood. So it's great that we can collaborate, and perhaps just to say that we will be doing some workshops on this area at the Democracy R&D annual gathering in a few weeks' time in Brussels, and also an open event in Brussels as well that same week, bringing together the kind of children's rights, youth policy and deliberative democracy community, which is great. And David, to your point earlier, we're really hoping to kind of channel this into a community of practice that we can support and nurture as this continues to grow in interest globally. So this session comes at a really nice time. But we have a very interesting group of people here. We have Mariana, you're in the middle of getting a children and youth assembly up and running. Alyssa, you have lots of experience working on children and young people's participation in that kind of city level planning and design, and kind of regional design as well. And so it would be really interesting to hear from both of you. And also Joe, I was struck that you talked about your work and interest in the kind of digital deliberation tools. I know there's a really increasing amount of interest in how the kind of intersections between digital deliberation and also youth engagement as well. So it would be really great to hear from all three of you, and also David as well. What your kind of, I guess, initial reflections are on the example Che shared, but also if you have any specific question for Che, it would be great to hear from you. Kind of open the floor.
I have a specific question. So politics usually moves rather slowly, especially Swiss politics. In the assembly, in the members of the assembly, did you have the feeling that they had expectations that more would change more quickly as a result of the assembly? Was there some frustration there, or was everyone aware that the world is not going to change overnight?
Yeah, that's a good topic. I think we did quite well in expectation management, I would say. But I was very aware of that in the beginning already. So we set out really to make clear this is not like the revolution. It's like really come up with solutions and working hard on these recommendations. And if we're lucky, we can kind of introduce that into different processes. And I think we succeeded in making it really, how to say, very specific about each recommendation. So for example, there was a recommendation about changing the law around social media and kind of what the influence is with mental health, for example. Like, and I knew from the beginning, this is like a huge thing. Like this is at least like 5 to 10 years. You would have to change the constitution. So this is a big project. So I think we worked with trying to be really honest about what that means, and that it doesn't mean that it's impossible to change, but there's a very specific path maybe for this kind of recommendation. And in other cases, maybe the access is more easy, or you could already see there is governments trying to enact even certain areas. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we managed this whole thing. But of course, some assembly members that I'm sure there were sometimes higher expectations that were met, or yeah, some people were kind of put down. But I think we tried to do it as concrete as possible. I think that's kind of, and then this is also the education. Like there's a lot of education behind that, because normally you don't know what the processes are, or you don't, yeah, you haven't thought about it, how complicated things are. So I think it has also a positive impact in kind of managing your own political skills, or like skills in understanding democracy itself. So I think there's always these aspects, yeah. But and I think the younger, I guess, the younger people get, maybe the higher the expectation, maybe, or like to really change something, and then so it's really something to manage. But I don't know, Katie, what your experiences are. But it can be tiring, or this feeling of like, oh my God, this nothing is possible, or you get like these negative feedbacks. So
Yeah, I think maybe just to sort of build on that, Alyssa, just for context, so I've worked on citizens assembly with children, which have been part of assemblies with the adult population. So in Scotland, we had a climate assembly, and I was working on the children's process as part of that, and then followed on in Ireland working on a children's assembly that fed into the adults assembly on biodiversity loss. So in my contest, it's been a little bit more about intergenerational dialogue, even if the children and adults processes were parallel. But to your question, I think what we saw in both of those cases, and also others that I've been researching, is that through the design of supporting children and young people to learn about the solutions that are possible, but also for them to come up with their own ideas of the kind of actions they want to take individually, that can help with that kind of feeling of that they're waiting for, like, grand systemic change, which, as you say, takes a long time. So I think we've approached the design of the assembly to actually empower children to be agents of change themselves as well, so that they're developing recommendations and calls to action for, government officials or elected representatives, but that they're also able to leave feeling that they can do something in the here and now. And so that kind of combats that challenge of them feeling that they're kind of hanging on and growing up fast whilst policy making is slow. And so by actually seeing that children and young people can leave and take action themselves, that kind of helps to bring it to more of like concrete short-term change that they can affect. So I think that's something, again, that deliberation or these deliberative processes can be a real force for good, is that you're also empowering a group of people to take action themselves, as well as demanding that action at a more systemic level.
maybe one thing about this as well. I think it's always going to be the impact on different levels, like you said, like even the individual level, but then also like I said before, the NGO sector, for example, which I would claim maybe we had the largest impact, because this kind of recommendation document comes up in a lot of different circles, maybe as you know, actually. So it's kind of a guiding yeah, the recommendations really play a role, for example, with decision makers on the question of, okay, what should we focus on in terms of mental health with young people. So, and then maybe there's some particular recommendations that have a more systemic approach, or they should be discussed in Parliament, or they are discussed in Parliament. So it's really about kind of the layers of society, basically, and it can have impact in different ways and different on different levels. I think that's a wonderful thing about these assemblies. I think kind of a reference document you create, actually, for change in a certain field. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, Alyssa, like I know you also work on the Child Friendly Cities initiative with UNICEF. Do you have reflections from working on that also perhaps feed into that question of balancing the short-term change where children kind of have those expectations versus the long-term changes?
Yeah. It's something that comes up basically in any city or municipality I go to, because the cities we work with, they are also required, but they also want to do some sort of participatory processes with children and young people. And usually it can, yeah, what I see a lot, it can be a source of frustration for the children or the young people who participated in this, and then they have participated, they have brought in their ideas, they have worked on projects, and then this goes kind of into the whole machine of the city's politics and administration. And then for a really long time, nothing happens. It's not that nothing happens, but a lot of stuff happens just behind the scenes, or just everything just takes a long time. Some of the children will be they will be adults by the time anything has changed, and I feel that this is a factor that is often neglected also in the preparation, and this is why we work with the cities also on this topic. Like you have to communicate in terms of expectations, but also then afterwards give regular updates of where we stand with which projects. Some things can be implemented really easily, really fast, but a lot of things take time. Yeah, and it's often overlooked, or adults do not always realize that even 6 months is a really long time for a child. They feel like, yeah, okay, we're gonna follow up now after half a year, and they think they were quick about it, but they might not have been.
Yeah. Maybe on a kind of positive note, what I have been really struck by, and I think Shay, you as well, both in both processes, well, that we've worked on, the children and young people, the participants have been so engaged since the process happened. Now, to give the example of Ireland, it was 3 years ago this month. I'm taking 2 of the participants to open the UN Forum on Democracy and Human Rights in Geneva in a few weeks' time. And they're still open to talking about it. They've grown up. They were 9 at the time. They're now 13. One was 12, now 16. And yet they're such advocates for these processes. They do so much work in their schools and communities as a result that they're still willing to come and champion these processes 3 years after having been in one. So I think it goes to show that, they might be a lot older, but what they took away from it has grown up with them, and they're continuing to be huge advocates for these processes, and now at the international stage as well. So that also has to mean something, in that context. So great. Oh, but I'm glad you raised that, Alyssa. Thanks so much. I noticed that we've had Delia join us. Welcome, Delia. I wonder if you want to say hello and just sort of say a little bit about you and what brought you here today. If you can hear me.
I don't think so.
Yeah, maybe not. Delia, if you are there at any point and want to say hi, please do just chime in. But Mariana, you're in a different position. You're just at the very beginning of your journey to starting an assembly. So I don't know, did anything particular that Shay shared resonate with you, or what kind of reflections have you got, given where you are in the process, or questions that you might have?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Che, for sharing the kind of, in general, the process, the results, the learning. I've been taking a lot of notes to have many of the points that you mentioned in the radar. And we are currently in the process of defining the remit. And you mentioned that the young people, participants decided the topic, right? But I was wondering what happened with the remit. Did they also participate? or yeah, I don't know if I missed it, but yeah, I'm curious about at what level they engage in that process of the, the
The
question.
government?
Hmm?
Or what? Sorry, I missed the word government. If
Oh,
the
the
government,
remit. So the question that the participants respond to, when they're kind of proposing the, policies or
yeah,
recommendations.
yeah. So yeah, we can dive into that. So the topic selection was, as I indicated, was this study was kind of the main reference, and like the prioritization of these topics, right? But the thing we did before we asked we did conduct the study, was we reached out to the government departments in these fields, and we asked them, so if we would do an assembly in this field of mental health or climate change or other topics, what kind of specific question would you ask the young people? So we already had kind of the first commitment of governing bodies that are responsible for this topic. I think that's a very interesting, a very important step before conducting because otherwise you have to have some commitment, right, from kind of the officials or other maybe other governing bodies in the NGO world. So we tried to really to have this commitment, and then after, which is also stressful, I have to tell you, like this way of doing it is not easy because you have a very limited time frame between the time you know what the topic is and kind of the first day of the assembly, because this process cannot be too long, right? So in our case, we had, I think, 4 months in total to kind of run from knowing the topic until kind of standing on a stage and opening the assembly. So that's a very condensed time. So everything you can do before you will do, so like to get the commitment and stuff, but yeah, it's a very big difference if you have an assembly about climate change or mental health, obviously. And it's a whole other kind of sector of stakeholders. So I think there is pluses and downsides kind of with this topic selection. I think your life is easier if you know the topic from the beginning. So I'm not saying here I would 100% only do it with this topic selection process, but on the other hand, you have this kind of buy-in from the group you kind of want to serve, like the young people. And that's also worth a lot. So it always be kind of this on the one side, on the other side, kind of. What I will say also is it really also depends on the specific country and kind of environment you're doing this. If there is zero knowledge about citizen assemblies, this will be very hard as well, because you will have to have a lot of resources to kind of introduce people, be it in the government or politicians or whoever, to make them kind of understand what this even means, or right, like, because also like after 6 months, sometimes people from the government say, like this youth participation, but like it's not like a clear thing to most people what sortition means, what kind of this selection means, and all of these steps. So that's also vastly different, I think, from country to country, I guess, or like from the environment you're doing the assembly. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? It's been a little hard to hear. I'm curious, and with an immediate thing, I'm tomorrow night here in Los Angeles, I'm supposed to moderate a panel about the in honor of the 175th birthday of California as an American state, back in September of 1850. Supposed to go 175 years into the future. So the year 2200, that's beginning of the 23rd century. That's when James T. Kirk was commanding the Starship Enterprise, and you know, Starfleet Academy is in San Francisco. And I've tried, even with colleagues, really struggled to get people to talk and frame discussions that are in the future. And I wonder what tricks or things you've learned about how to get, when you structure conversations, to get people to really put themselves in the future. What works?
Yeah, Katie, please save me.
Maybe I can maybe offer some activity or like exercises, Joe, that I often use with children and young people to do exactly that. I think something that's really helpful is first of all to imagine a not too far distant scenario. So I do a lot of kind of scenario or like role play activities to imagine to support children to use like drama and play to imagine scenarios, but also art. And so one way is to have a really simple question that to like get their imaginations flowing. It's like often I use somewhere a date not as far as that in the future, just a date where they would actually still likely be on this planet. But to imagine, you know, a conversation where you're asking them to draw or act out a day in the life when in the year 2050. Like, what do you see when you're walking down the street? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? Kind of like almost a meditation activity, but to really get them to think about the environment that they're in. Now, I will say this can also you have to be mindful of facilitation. You want to know what end goal. Do you want it to have a positive outcome? Like, do you want to support your participants to think positively about the kind of dream, like possible world that they are aspiring to? Or are you wanting them to reflect on what it could look like if we don't act? And I think making that really clear to the participants is important. And so that is a useful kind of foresight tool that can be used, that sort of like scenario planning. And sometimes we do it in parallel to each other. So you would have like option A and option B, you know, and then you ask them, okay, so what do we do to reach the best outcome? Option like vision A, and how do we get there and avoid heading down the path that will take us to vision B, and supporting participants to think that way. But also one that I experienced recently as a participant that I thought was really interesting was actually an organization called Moral Imaginations, who did an activity for us during London Climate Week. And during this kind of exercise, the lead facilitator read out a story. And so we were told to kind of close our eyes and to listen to this picture of London that she presented in the year 2050 that she herself had written. And she talked about very subtle, but like little things that are achievable that looked like she talked about the fact that people were commuting by swimming down the Thames, which at this point in time you couldn't begin to imagine given the state of our waterways. But you know, that is something that is achievable, that happens in other places. You know, Alyssa and Che will know this happens in Zurich, it happens in Bern in Switzerland, so it is achievable. And she kind of did this story meditation that helped people to think, oh, there is actually hope in the kind of vision that we might want for the future. So there's definitely some kind of tools that can encourage that kind of thinking. But yeah, I'm happy to share some after this call as well, directly.
Thank you.
I also put a note in the chat. It's a funny thing because the Swiss constitution is only 2 years older. So that's a funny through line kind of, and we did a publication 2 years ago about that. So maybe that helps you as well. Like, and also I know California has this direct democracy tradition. I don't know how old that is. Maybe much
1911.
younger.
1911.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Swiss case, I think it's 1874 or something. So maybe there's some interesting parallels. I don't know.
Thank you.
All right. Sure.
I have a question
Yes.
to both Che and Katie. What are the most important things that are different about deliberation with young adults or children versus deliberation with older adults?
Do you want to
Yeah,
start?
what was it? I think I like to like in terms of how important it is and kind of the agency and how seriously we should take it. I think there's no difference. I like to start with that. Of course, there's differences, but I think it's a basic human kind of necessity to involve young people into democracy. I think that's always my starting line in these contexts. So there's nothing special about that, basically. But of course, if you kind of dive deeper into how do you do that and with what kind of tools or what kind of facilitation methods, and I think there is differences. And the second thing I would say, and that's I think where we are maybe also most aligned and most interested together, is kind of how can we make sure we kind of as adults don't talk about kind of them, but that projects or anything we're going to do in the future to stress that and also to really involve more young people to kind of co-design, like it's more together on the path to that goal. So I think that's there is still a lot of open questions, I think, how to do that exactly and in what ways, and but yeah, maybe you can dive deeper into the question, Katie, what the differences are. But I mean, of course I see differences on a granular level, but I think as a general thought, I would say no, this is kind of part of it. It's kind of the same. But yeah, what will you say, Katie?
I think it's a great question. And I think I have two different answers that both almost contradict themselves. I think on one hand, there is, deliberative democracy, the kind of processes we use, whether that's citizens' assemblies or PB or citizen councils, juries, and other kinds of democratic innovation, they, of course, I'm particularly thinking about citizens' assembly actually in this context, but if we are to involve children, we do have to think about the kind of unique considerations from like a child rights safeguarding perspective, accessibility, and as Che was talking, like perhaps expanding on the kind of methods that are used to make sure it's really engaging and fun and dynamic. And I actually write about this in guidance that I wrote for the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies about some of these kind of unique considerations that when we're thinking about involving under 18s, we need to be mindful of, and particularly that safeguarding element and that kind of responsibility of care that we have as designers and facilitators of the process. But then interestingly, I've been meeting with a lot of people this year and kind of helping to run training and support people on their assembly journey, if you like. And I've been so struck by the number of people that have said, but we should be thinking about these things with adults. Like, it's great that you use really participatory, creative, active, nature-based, methods with children, but my goodness, we need to start getting adults moving in citizens' assemblies. We need to use space better. We need to think about all of the ways that adults learn differently, not just children. And similarly with that like safeguarding idea and that like community of care, or that kind of care that we have and responsibility as designers and facilitators, like we should also be looking out for our adult assembly members and thinking about their safeguarding as well as children. And of course, there's uniqueness there, but I think there's a lot that we can learn both ways. In the children's rights world, we're learning a lot from how democratic lottery and the kind of format of assemblies can be so beneficial to increasing children's participation in democracy. But vice versa, I think the deliberative democracy world can learn a lot from how those of us working in child participation, and I'm looking at Alyssa, we've been working in this kind of very inclusive and creative and dynamic way with children and young people for many, many decades. So I think there's a really interesting learning opportunity that comes both ways. And yeah, so I kind of, on one hand, there are unique considerations for working with children and young people, but I think some of those are things actually those working with adults could be thinking about better within the context of adult-oriented processes, which is interesting.
Does anyone have any final questions? We're a little bit past time.
I had a quick question, kind of with the reporter cap on. There's this town in California, Salinas Valley, that 10 years ago created a youth version of the city council and gave it real legal authority. Not sure it's actually totally legal what they did, but the town is tiny and there's no other places around it for 10 miles in any direction. And so the kids actually, you can choose to be on the thing, but the kids have written many laws. They do, significantly serious surveys on where they survey tenants and people in the community on their relationships with the police. They wrote a full mental health element for the city's general plan that was so good it got published in a prestigious American medical journal. Like, have you heard of any other places that give anywhere in the world, in Switzerland also, that give like that kind of authority to, these are kids as young as 12, as old as 18. They give authority to people like that at that level?
Absolutely love this. Please share it in the
Yeah.
chat.
I will. I will try here from the phone, but yeah. But
All right.
anyone ever seen anyone do anything like that? It's an unusual place. It's a community mostly of farm workers and food processors. It's not rich, but like more than 40% of the people are 18 or under. So this was partly a decision to reflect that. And many of the older people don't necessarily have legal status.
Yeah, that's so
Sounds-
interesting. And I
Sounds
really
very
would,
interesting.
yeah,
What's
I'd
the
love to
name
hear
of the
more.
town?
The
Yeah.
town is named Gonzales. It ends with an S.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you look my name in it, you'll see some stories about it. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
it's so interesting.
they're just about to open. They actually found the financing for about a $25 million kind of community center and maker space development, which will be the biggest building in town that's not a food processing plant. And so that's going to open in December. But anyway, I'm just trying to find anything like that with not much luck.
I might come in there, Joe, and say, there are lots of examples of children doing incredible like citizenship leadership work in their communities, and also increasing numbers of children that are using the legal system to access or to fight for justice, particularly environmental and climate issues. I can ask around, definitely others that might know of examples of this type of thing. But the other thing I wanted to highlight, there's some incredible like child-led, child participation movements within Latin America in particular that might be of interest, which is a real, I was actually talking about this with Mariana on Friday, where there's a real kind of intergenerational solidarity and a real kind of history of work being done in Latin America to sort of amplify children's agency from a very, very young age. So I can also dig out some examples there that might be of interest to you.
That would be great. I've spent a lot of time in Mexico, so I've actually seen some of this, and most of the people in the town are overwhelmingly from one part of Jalisco state, which has an unusual religious tradition that points people to very high levels of community involvement. But it's anyway, I would love to know more about that, particularly anything outside Mexico. I think I've met every youth participation effort in Mexico at this point, and they're very impressive, some of them. Yeah.
Great. Oh, but thanks for sharing that example. That's really promising. And I think we are seeing a general global recognition of the role children and young people are playing in like pushing for more more of an active role in society and in democracy, which is great. And I think a big part of that has been children's role in the climate movement. That's kind of, I don't want to say, won their place in other spaces, but it has to some extent kind of contributed to that growing sense that we cannot be ignoring children and young people anymore. This has got to change. So great to hear of examples like that. Thank you. Great. And I think that will bring us to the end of our call today.
Yes.
But thanks so much, Jay, for your reflections. And
Thank you so much.
and David, thanks again for